Welcome back to ITE 1932 Technical Writing. I am Nishansati Silva, and today we will look at summarizing graphics. This is the color coding that we will be using for this lecture and all the subsequent lectures. Please pause here for a bit and remember this color code. Graphics are everywhere. You would need to describe them in or out of the professional setting. So it is a good skill to have. Now let's look at some types of graphics in technical documents. You have line graphs, bar charts, pie charts, histograms, scatter plots, Venn diagrams, area charts, spline charts, box and whisker charts, bubble charts, radar charts, pyramid graphs, maps, flowcharts, and a lot more. Now, don't worry too much about whether it is called graph or chart. Most of the time, they are used interchangeably. Same goes with plot. But the conventions are for calling something a scatter plot rather than a scatter graph, or calling it a bar chart rather than a bar plot. Now, let's talk about how to write about graphs and charts. First, you need to carefully observe the graphic. Try to understand it. What is it about? What is it trying to convey? You can circle and highlight the important details in the graph if you have a printed version. You can use arrows, make notes, circle the biggest, smallest, or stable, unchanging parts, sudden increases, sudden drops, recoveries, oscillating patterns, that sort of. Then you identify trends. The trend is the overall idea. This can also happen in a sub-area of the graph as well. Identifying trends in a smaller scale helps you identify larger trends, similar to the oscillating patterns that I mentioned earlier. Then you have to see what's happening, what has happened. What are the trends? Are they going up? Are they going down? And so on and so forth. If it is a graph with time, look at how things change with time. And remember to know what are the most noticeable thing about the graph. The patterns over time, patterns over different places or groups of people. If it is on time or not, you might have separate classes that are being analyzed. If there are keywords, underline them. You do not need to do this on the legend because legend is a set of words by themselves. But if there is a description paragraph, it is a good idea to underline the important parts. Related words, synonyms. Then you prepare a skeleton, not the school kind, but the skeleton of the summary that you are writing. So when you describe the graph, let it flow with the graph, build with the graph. It start from an end or start from an idea build upon it, just like how the graph is. Okay. Let's see how to prepare a skeleton. First, you need an introduction. And in the introduction, you can start with the traditional approaches. This graph shows, the graph illustrates, this graph is about, so on and so forth. It gives the reader an idea of what they are looking for. Next, you can describe one or two trends of the graph. You can put one and keep the other for the conclusion. Or maybe you can mention both here and then reiterate both in the conclusion. Remember, everything that we say are guidelines. They are not rules that are absolute. You do have freedom to change where appropriate. It is the whole point of writing creatively. Just because this is writing professionally or professional writing does not mean that we are going to put a dam on your creativity. Now, the first paragraph, you select the first trend and say city size increased sharply. See, remember, no number. So it is something more tangible for humans. When you put numbers in the initial sentence, some people turn off. So giving a sentence with no number puts them at ease. Explain something with understandable words. Explain it with relative importance. The city size increased sharply over the period is a good idea. So they know that the size changed from smaller to larger over the period. Then you can follow the sentence with examples, with actual numbers. And perhaps you can have another example with a number. And then you should go back to a sentence with no numbers. Keeping this alternative pattern helps the reader not to distance him or herself when they are reading your summary. Let's go to trend 2. So if there are many trends, if there exists another trend, you should make sure that you have logically broken it down to separate paragraphs. If they are connected, maybe mention them. But if not, it is better to have a serious demarcation between the two paragraphs in the two descriptions. If there are two or more graphs to be compared, you need to compare the data between the two charts as well. See what are the similarities, what are the differences, and how they match up to each other. And finally, you can end with the conclusion. When you are writing the conclusion, repeat the main trends that you mentioned earlier. Mention the important similarities and differences between trends or between graphs. Do not use the same words. When you are saying if you use increased in the description, maybe you can use rose in the conclusion. It keeps your writing fresh and non-repetitive. Now, don't include any numbers in the conclusion. You could use most, the majority, minority, a small number to give an idea of numbers rather than citing the exact number. And never give opinions. You are describing the traffic. You are not giving out your opinions. You might have personal opinions on whether the trends are good or bad, but this is not the place to mention them. Now, let's look at don'ts. Don't write about everything. Pick the biggest, smallest, main points, main trends, similar things, things that catch your eye. You do not need to give exact information to recreate the graph. That is not our objective. Our objective is to summarize the graph. Somebody reading your summary without seeing the graph does not have to have the ability to redraw the graph. So make sure you are only mentioning the important points. Do not refer to technical components. Do not say line went down, the bar went down, the bar is higher. Instead, you have to say the oil production shot down. Or, comparatively, trousers were made more than shirts. Make sure that you write about the idea. Do not use shorthand. Don't say men went down or women went down or trousers went down. Say the number of men at university fell dramatically. The number of trousers provided or created by this factory increased. Full sentences. Do not say, I feel, or as I have written, as you can see. You have to keep it academic. You have to make sure that it doesn't look like an opinion. Do not relate personal knowledge and experience to the data. Only explain things in the graph, even if the subject that is being discussed is relevant to you. If it is something about, let's say, the COVID numbers in Sri Lanka, you cannot say, I also saw in a different newspaper article that I read, so and so happened. Never do that. Only describe the things that are in the graph. And do not provide personal opinions unless it is asked. Do not say, I think this is a good trend. I don't like this trend. I think this trend should be changed. Don't say that. It is not the place to give your personal opinions. Now, let's see how you name parts of diagrams. The vertical axis represents total annual sales. The horizontal axis shows our market share, or the horizontal axis shows time in years. If there is a curve, you can say the curve, the solid line, the dotted line, the broken line. Because if you are showing multiple things in the same graph, they would be using different lines to visualize the difference between various things that are being drawn. The shaded areas, the unshaded section also shows different areas. Dotted column, the color segment, the red bar. There are many ways to describe the parts of the diagrams, still being professional. Now let's see, once you have the idea, once you have the component, how to describe example phrases. Remember, you are not going to say the line went up or the bar is higher. You are going to say sales rose slightly in the final quarter. Profits fell a little. Demand increased gently. Turnover decreased steadily, suddenly, quickly. Demand increased rapidly. Profits fell dramatically. At the beginning of the year, sales stagnated. In the middle of the August, profits slumped. Demand peaked. Sales plummeted. Sales leveled off. Sale remained steady. See how different ideas are explained. Useful vocabulary to describe, let's say, going up, you would say rose, increased, went up, grew. Going down, decreased, fell, dropped, declined. No change. Stayed the same. Remained constant. Leveled off. Stabilized. Now, when you're saying stabilized and leveled off, they come in two different contexts. So you have to be very mindful in which type of no change phrase that you are using. Fluctuating, zigzag, fluttered, undulated. A good word to see a fluctuation pattern. Small changes, you can say gently, gradually, slightly, steadily. Or large changes, suddenly, sharply, dramatically, drastically, stably. And low points, you can say bottomed out, reached a low. Here is a example of summarizing graphs. Here's a time graph. You have to compare different methods of transport used in the United States over the last century: train, bus, and air. You can start with train because it is the oldest method, or you can start with air because it is the biggest method of public transport today. However, don't start with bus because it is very small and it has never been large. Now, here is an example of that graph being described. Pause here and read this summary and see how it has been done. Here is a comparison graph. You have to compare the amount of water used for domestic, agricultural, and industrial purposes in various countries. There are two ways to write about this graph. You can say by country or by use. If you decide to write by use, you could start with agriculture because it is the largest numbers. And in the second paragraph, maybe you can talk about domestic use. And finally, you can touch on the industrial use. Pause this slide here and write a summary by yourself. Let's compare what you have written with a sample. You can say Saudi Arabia, Oman are the top users of water for agriculture, each of them accounting for more than 80%. Comparatively, UAE and Qatar, with 60% of the use for agriculture, make up the middle, while Bahrain and Kuwait bring up the rear. So, we discussed agriculture. Next, in the second paragraph, we discuss domestic use. However, when we look at domestic use, the use of water in the home, Bahrain and Kuwait leads the pack with more than 50% usage. Qatar and UAE follows close behind, while Saudi Arabia and Oman shows minimal use. Now try writing about the industrial. You can start with, in the case of industrial use, Kuwait has almost similar consumption to their domestic use, but slightly less. And continue. Okay. Now let's quickly look at how to summarize maps. You need to identify the main directions: north, south, east, west. Sometimes it is useful to draw them on the top right or top left or anywhere that you like. You have to identify the landmass, rivers, parks, grounds, buildings. Describe the components in the map related to the. Use the prepositions of place: at, in, on, by, beside, to, or, from. Use these words. For example, dramatic changes took place in the city center. To the south of the town, there is a golf course surrounded by trains. A new school was built next to the swimming pool. The old road running from the north to south was replaced by a new motorway. A marina was built on the banks of the river. Now, look at this map. Both maps display an island before and after it was developed for tourism. Summarize the information by selecting the important points and make comparison where it is relevant. Write at least 150 words. So pause the video here and write your summary. Here is a sample summary. Now, as usual, you don't have to have the exact words as this summary, but see how the key ideas are discussed and see whether your summary is missing any. As parting thoughts, is a quote from Charles Thomas Monk. He said, "Mankind invented a system to cope with the fact that we are so intrinsically lousy at manipulating numbers. It is called the graph." So the point of graphs is to shield some people from numbers. So when you are describing, you are summarizing the graph, make sure you keep that shield up. Here are the references, and I shall see you next time.